Hey, it's Ashley Keller Williams, Real Estate Everett. Our journey continues through Backdoor Revolution. Okay, this chapter was just all right to me. Okay, this is chapter 11, a pathway for planners and advocates towards more permitted development. Now, I think this chapter is great if you're in that role, right? You can kind of take some lessons. You can sort of see what happened. I think you can, really sort of understand okay, maybe my city doesn't have ADUs and I want to apply it. And then I think for maybe the average everyday person, you know what? You might get some idea of why the ADU structures exist, like why the permits are the way that they are and all that stuff. I'm gonna say this kind of up front. Here's what I've noticed in the city of Everett. I think that there's a lot of political support for ADUs. The politicians feel some pressure from voters or people or residents or whatever around getting more affordable housing options. And so they hear about ADUs and they're like, great, ADUs are a solution. Let's build more ADUs. And I just really haven't seen more ADUs be built because the city doesn't build ADUs, right? The residents would have to build them, okay? You'd have to have some people that are like, hey, I'm willing to invest in the city. Or, hey, you know what? Yeah, I have a big lot. I could put an ADU back there and make a contribution. So that just really hasn't happened yet, right? So, I don't know if it will happen, right? But, there's all this stuff about, the missing middle and la, 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 la. And, they think that ADUs are a solution for that. And I think it's a bit of a moving target, right? Because, you'd have to be able to construct the ADU affordably. So is that a thing that can be done? Not sure. All right. Let's see. The one thing that he talked about that I thought was really cool is he said that ADUs will only really make economic sense in a tight rental market, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's very logical, right? Because if you don't have, low rental inventory and you have your market's completely flooded with rental inventory, then, you're going to have a lot of competition. The money just won't make sense for the person building the ADU, right? Because, it's just sort of simple supply and demand economics, right? You have a ton of supply, right? That means the demand is lower because you have a lot of extra, and then that kind of pushes prices down, right? So the amount of money that you'd get back for your investment would be much lower. So it would be ideal if you had kind of a shortage of rental housing and then really low vacancy, right? So pretty high demand. Basically, that means high demand and not a lot of options. The other thing to keep in mind, when we were kind of thinking about where ADUs would work the best, they're going to work the best in single family zoned areas, right? It's not going to work as much in multifamily, right? I mean, because if the multifamily lots are usually, a lot of times you're allowed to use the entire lot footprint. So it's already filled. You're not going to put an ADU in there. You're not going to put an ADU in an apartment, for example, right? So if you're in an area where it's mostly multifamily, probably ADUs are not really going to work very well. If you can, this is from an investor perspective, if you're kind of looking at areas, if you're looking at an area where it's mostly single family, then there's a lot of ADU opportunity. All right. I mean, the only other thing that you would need to know is what's the rental market like? All right. So of course, I think that we have this struggle a little bit too. We have a lot of political support for ADUs. He talks about this. We have a lot of ADU support here. But then I think we have some people that really want to preserve the historical character and the current zoning of single family in the city of Everett. And, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I mean, I think that that's there, right? And, I don't think that's something that is exclusive to the city of Everett. I think it happens in a lot of places, right? A lot of places are we want to maintain historic character. We don't want a bunch of apartment buildings popping up, right? So, of course. Now, he sort of kind of goes on this sort of premise that, if you really want to take steps to get more ADUs, you really have to start with attached ADUs first and move to detached ADUs. And he kind of makes an argument for ADUs in a basement, for example, or, maybe you build one in your second story or something like that, or an attached garage or something. They're just easier to permit and they're less expensive. The detached ones are going to be more expensive. So what you would likely see in a city that's beginning to adopt ADUs as a strategy, or like bring more ADUs in, is you're probably going to see more attached first and then slowly see detached ones. And, I think it also kind of goes back to what he was talking about, like amateur builders, like, basically like homeowner builders that are putting it together. They're just not as advanced. It's just going to be a slower process for them to get through it. He does spend quite a bit of time talking about different things, or let's see, maybe things is not the right word, different barriers to ADU development. So this would be either restrictions by permit, or the cost to connect to utilities, right? So to connect to like electrical, to connect to sewer and water, like depending on what the planning department wants you to do in order to connect to those utilities, it might just make it really difficult for somebody to actually put an ADU project through the planning process and actually move forward with it, because they find out, oh man, it's going to cost me whatever. Like he lists a number here. I think this is like pretty representative, $40,000 to attach to utilities, and the cost of those development just fees, right? This is not the building cost. These are just the fees to attach to the utilities, basically make the calculation like almost impossible, right? Because he's saying like, okay, well, like maybe your ADU is, I don't know, maybe your ADU is 180,000, right? And you got to pay 40 grand to just connect it to utilities. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I don't really know like where those administrative fees go, if they're warranted, if they should be that high, no clue. But I could see from an investor perspective, why you might not do that. Why you might be like, well, ADU is going to cost me 300,000 and then I got to spend 50 grand to connect it. Yeah, that's kind of like, whew, maybe those numbers just don't make any sense anymore when you're thinking about the amount of rent you're going to be able to get, or like how much you could maybe potentially sell it for. And so the different fees that he talks about, where these would be maybe things that would de-incentivize ADU development, would be permit fees, connection to sewer service, stormwater management, water service. I have experience with all of these. System development charges, electrical service, and property tax increases. Yes, because if you add an ADU to your property, it's very likely that the assessor will be there the very next day to see what you put there, to see how much value you've just added to that land. So you would have an increase in your property tax. I do know that we have, I think the city of Everett does allow you to connect to existing sewer lines, but when I talk to contractors, when you talk to the people, it kind of a little bit to me sounds like it might actually be better to tap in an additional sewer line. It just depends on what the property is. I mean, like if you're just doing a studio and it's just one toilet, it's fine. But it just depends on what your project is. Same thing with the water service. When we were looking into it, I think they were telling us that we might need to increase our water line size in order to accommodate another unit's usage. So, those fees just kind of add up, right? They're just extra. And, you start getting into it and you're kind of like, oh, well, this is not really like affordable to me anymore. Or, the rent, the investment doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the other thing that he talks about is having the actual program guidance from the city in like plain English. Now, I have some experience with this. It's, here's the thing, and I alluded to this in like a previous video. The language that is used by development experts and the permitting division of the city of Everett and the planning department and all those folks, they're using their own language. They have a jargon. Okay, so if you're like, hey, like maybe you're an accountant, okay? Like they just use completely different language. And so, what he's kind of suggesting is that, if you kind of know who the audience is, right? Like he's kind of thinking most ADU developers are going to be homeowner developers. Then you would make this process more accessible and easier to get through for just an average everyday person, okay? I mean, with that being said, all these things that he lists, like bylaws, zoning requirements, ordinances, setbacks, special building code requirements, ceiling and roof height requirements, yeah. Stormwater plans, all kinds of stuff. You know, it's all a part of the planning process. Okay, and you know, it's just my opinion. Do I think it should be? Like, probably. I mean, I think some of these things, yes, some of them maybe not. He talked about some things that other markets have done to incentivize ADU builds. So, you know, they would just kind of do things like where they would like exempt some of the fees. You know, I think that's a good idea. I think it would be really clear, right? Like if the city of Everett, for example, wanted to get more ADUs, it might make sense to me to either reduce or eliminate the fees for a certain time. You know, maybe there's like a, you know, kind of like a gray out period. Maybe they do like, okay, for the next 5 years, if you permit your ADU, we waive your permit fees or something like that, right? I think that would be incentivizing. Waive your permit fees, you go build your ADU, you're all set, right? That's a nice discount. And I think that that's kind of what people are looking for. Like, I haven't really seen that. I think that they do exempt some fees, but it would be good if they did more for that, because again, okay, you know, they're like, let's think about it this way. The city of Everett is like, we have a housing shortage. The city of Everett has a housing problem. Ashley Bolden doesn't have a housing problem. You know, if they wanted to enlist Ashley Bolden's help on getting some houses, they might want to say, hey, let's incentivize this and make it accessible to the people that are living in the city of Everett, so they'll help us with this out, you know, help us out with this, right? Like, they'll help us build them, you know? And so, you know, people might be looking for, like, tell me what the clear incentives are, you know, clear incentives from the city. All right, let's see. You know, he talks about like how you would measure like whether or not, you know, like the city should track like what ADUs are being built. I think the city of Everett is doing that. He talks about things that advocates could do. He talks about financing options for ADUs. I think something was really interesting in here. I think he said something like appraisers didn't have any value to ADUs. Shocking. Okay. Like, really? Oh my God. And it was a little bit funny. Like, it's sort of like, oh, appraisers will come out and do that. They'll do an appraisal, and then like sort of a little bit further down the road, after they've kind of like really understood ADUs, they were like, oh, actually, ADUs contribute to 34% of the property's value. Oh man. Woo. But that came out through Fannie Mae. So, you know, it was a little bit interesting. I think as the ADU idea progresses, right, we'll start to develop comparable properties. You know, sales will happen. We'll have an idea of what the market value is of an ADU. I think a lot of it is probably going to be like initially on the cost basis, and then we'll start getting like, you know, market information. We'll get some comps. Then he talks about like kind of goes into like the origins of single family zoning and why people might have like these attitudes towards apartments or ADUs being in single family areas. And he talks a little bit about, you know, the different cases, whether or not that zoning makes sense. I mean, I think that this, you could go much deeper into this. He kind of has like, you know, I would say like a summary view of what's going on with multifamily zones versus single family zones versus industrial zones and upzoning and mixed use and all that stuff. I mean, what I would say is that I think in our city, we do have quite a bit of single family in certain areas. And I think, you know, what will the future look like? I think that either that stuff is going to go away or it's going to become very expensive. Okay. He talks a little bit about certain cities creating like kind of like an amnesty program to like get people to actually permit their ADUs so that they're safe, right? Because a lot of times, you know, people will add like an informal, unpermitted ADU, you know, in their basement, and it hasn't gone through any safety or anything like that. And so it sounds to me like those things haven't been you know, really successful, right? Because here's the thing that the homeowner's thinking. Okay, so now I'm going to go and like turn myself into the city. You know, so the city, because it's an amnesty program, they're not going to like penalize you, but you do have some penalty, right? Because if you didn't build it to code, and now you have to bring all the stuff that you've done, all the work that you've done up to today's current code, like it's going to cost you some money. And so, you know, you might not be too motivated to do that. And then he goes on and he talks about, let's see, he talks about how much informal ADUs and I would even go on to say like informal multifamily contributes to the missing middle housing. We have a lot of that in the city of Everett. I mean, I think if the city of Everett buckled down and said, hey, everything has to be permitted, there's a lot of multifamily. There's a lot of like informal ADUs that would need permitting. Okay. And I just don't know, you know, what that would look like. Maybe like a phase-in program, phase-out program. I don't even know if they would do it. Because here's the thing, the majority of the city of Everett is rentals. All right. The other thing he talks a little bit about is attaching ADUs to affordable programs for senior housing. He said basically this has not really been that successful. And, you know, let's see if he, I don't believe that he really said why. I think that basically what ends up happening is like the regulations and the permitting and all that stuff just becomes too difficult and too complex for somebody. You know, if you're thinking about senior housing and such. So, I think in the future maybe it could work. I think that's it. Like, what's the incentive? You know, like if you currently own a home that's a single family house, what is the incentive for you to build an ADU? I mean, what like why would you want to go through the permitting process, the development process, the conversations with the contractors, and fork out the money to add an ADU? I mean, I can see people that are doing that, like, you know, maybe you have adult children and you're like, oh man, let's get them something off, you know, like we could get them like a little detached unit. Okay, I get it. But just like an average everyday person, not sure, okay, on the incentive. But you know what, look, I mean, leave your comments down below. We'd love to hear it. Let's see. We're almost done with the book. I think we have, let's see, we have one. Yeah, we basically have like one chapter and then the conclusion. So we're going to wrap up this book and we'll move on to the next thing. So please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.